Hi, and welcome back to SP 3673. So far in this course, we covered an introduction to autism, and then we covered an introduction to evidence-based practice in ABA to kind of give you a foundation for thinking about curriculum development and assessment throughout the rest of this course. So we're going to proceed by talking about both, essentially. So in this unit, we're going to talk about deciding what to teach with largely a focus on curriculum development. Here's the outline for this unit. First, I'm going to give you some background on some of the special education law and history and general approach to developing curricula for students with autism, other developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities. And then we're going to move into talking about different curricular areas that you draw from and conduct assessments in to develop individualized curricula. And then we'll talk about some additional curricular considerations and also describe for you a curriculum development procedure, which is described by the authors in your text, in your assigned reading. We'll talk about how curricular refinement, that's where you further individualize the curriculum for your student, and then talk about the curricular format. So there are several main ideas in this unit, and the first one is that education law has implications for curriculum. In other words, there are implications for the decisions a teacher makes regarding how much of a student's curriculum should be focused on the standard academic curriculum, or to the extent that it should include goals pertaining to functional life skills or vocational skills. So we're going to distinguish between the standard academic curriculum and individualized curricula in general across this unit. And we're going to talk about how that pertains to the individualized education plan. In other words, how it is that the decision making involved in developing an individualized education plan is influenced by the requirements of special education law and trying to strike this balance between individualized curriculum and giving the student access to the standard academic curriculum. In general, all of this curriculum development needs to take place in context of considering the student's long-term and short-term goals. In other words, where are they now, and then where are they headed? And then at the end, we'll talk about a process for putting it all together. So, and I guess the way to think about this as a main idea is that you'll need a process for putting all of this stuff together. And so your textbooks chapter that we're reading this week will help you do that. Okay, so those are the main ideas of this unit. So let's first look at some background here. And here are your objectives. Objective 1 is to identify and discriminate between 3 eras of curriculum development for students with ID and DD. So sometimes I'm going to say DD, that means developmental disorders, that includes autism, spectrum disorders, and other developmental disorders. Then you're to identify points of conflict between IDEA and ESA regarding curriculum development. And that'll do it. Okay, so first let's talk about curriculum. Now, curriculum, simply put, is what you teach, such as skills, activities, strategies, concepts, and content. So an example of a skill is teaching a young child how to use glue. An example of an activity could be how to play Connect 4 or other board games. An example of a strategy would be how to identify the plot in a story. And for an example of a concept could be teaching a child what a mystery is or what democracy is. And an example of content is all of the materials and activities used to teach skills, activities, strategies, and concepts. That's content. Not everything a student with autism needs to be taught can be taught. All right, so autism is a spectrum. you're going to have some students with autism. The majority of the things they learn need to be directly taught. You're going to have students at other end of the spectrum that benefit almost, or I should say, almost respond as well to typical teaching practices as typically developing children. So there's a whole continuum there. So, well, what's important to think about there is that you have to develop curricula that offer the most benefit by teaching what matters most. That means in a lot of cases you're going to be presented with kids that have far too many skills that need to be directly taught, and you only have so much time, you only have so many resources, so you have to prioritize and select those skills, activities, strategies, concepts, and content that are going to be most benefit that student. So there are three eras. The first era is 1970s to 1990s, referred to as the one-size-fits-all approach era. In the 1990s is the social and leisure skills area. And in 2001 to 2015 it's described as the special education law era. So in 1970 to 1990, in the one-size-fits-all approach, historically students with ID and DD were too often provided curricula based on functional life skills. In other words, teaching them how to brush their teeth, get dressed, tie their shoes, prepare a bowl of cereal, wash their hands, find transportation, with little emphasis on academic skills in preparation for college or trade school. So this was the one-size-fits-all approach, and the result was widespread exclusion. So in other words, students with intellectual disability and developmental disabilities, their curricula were so heavily focused on functional life skills, they didn't spend a lot of time with typically developing students or other students without disabilities. And so this was kind of like the culture from 1970 to 1990. All right, so then the culture shifted in the 1990s, where this is the social and leisure skills era. In this era, curricula included more efforts focused on leisure skills and social skills, and enhancing inclusion through self-determination. That's another way of saying enhancing inclusion through giving students more choice, more opportunities to demonstrate their preferences and make choices in their life. But in many cases, inclusion was not supported by data showing that inclusion benefited the student. Okay, it's a beautiful idea to teach them leisure skills and social skills and give them more choices and send them into environments where they're, getting experiences with typically developing children, other children without disabilities. But if you place a student in a context where it sounds great, but they're not progressing, then it's the wrong context. And so that's what was often discovered in the 1990s. That typically, in many cases, inclusion did not enable them to meet their goals. Okay, so in the next era, there was another shift in culture. This is 2001 to 2015, referred to as the special education law era by your text. And so, No Child Left Behind, and now ESA, the main federal law for general education K through 12, which replaced No Child Left Behind in 2015, mandates access to the standard curriculum for all students, and it's expected that all students reach grade level. Now, there are some ESA requirements, such as, or I should say, I guess the way to say this is exceptions, is that 1% of students can use alternative assessments and modified standards. And by modified standards, we mean an alternative curriculum. 2% of students can use alternate assessments, but they need to be tested on standard academic curriculum. Okay, so the difference there between, so that means 97% of students need to contact standard assessments and standard academic curriculum and then reach grade level. But there's 3% of students for which there's exceptions. 1% of students, they can contact an alternative curriculum and you can use alternative assessments. But 2%, it's fine to use alternative assessments, but they have to be tested on the standard academic curriculum. Okay, so that's special education law era from 2001 to 2015. So now let's do some ASRs. ASR 1. The one-size-fits-all era was A, 1970 to 1990, B, 1990s, or C, 2001 to 2015. I'll give you a few more seconds. All right, I'll close the poll, and the answer here is A, 1970 to 1990. ASR 2. The special education era was A, 1970 to 1990, B, 1990s, or C, 2001 to 2015. Give it a few more seconds. All right, I'll close the poll, and the answer here is C, 2001 to 2015. ASR 3. The social and leisure skills era was A, 1970 to 1990, B, 1990s, or C, 2001 to 2015. A couple more seconds. All right, I'll close the poll, and the answer here is B, the 1990s. All right, so now when ESA became law in 2015, it created a conflict with IDEA regarding curriculum. And there are arguments in favor of leaning towards IDEA or towards ESA. Well, here's the conflict. IDEA requires teachers to use individualized curricula to serve their students. But ESA requires all students to master the standard academic curriculum. In other words, there are these opposing pressures on teachers who have to make complex and many complex decisions about developing curricula for their students. Right, so this conflict introduces another layer of complexity in curriculum development because the requirements of teachers are opposites. Now there are some who lean towards ESA. And regarding special education curriculum, those who lean towards ESA's expectations and requirements say that students have a right to a full educational opportunity and that we do not know yet their potential to learn it. So they emphasize, folks who lean towards ESA emphasize unknown potential of their students. B, can learn skills relevant to adult functioning. All right, so they assume students can learn skills relevant to adult functioning when placed in a standards-based curriculum, all right, such as math skills for technology-related jobs. They also assume that students do not need functional skills as a prerequisite to academic skills. In other words, they don't need to learn how to tie their shoes or to make a sandwich or to wash their hands or to floss their teeth in order to benefit from instruction in literacy, in math, in social studies, and other academic subjects. D, they assume students may have an advantage with combined academic and functional curriculum in terms of self-efficacy, enjoyment, and possible adult outcomes. So those are the assumptions for folks that lean towards ESA. Now there are folks that lean towards IDEA's requirements and expectations. So they argue that evidence for positive effects of immersion in the standard academic curriculum on post-school outcomes for students with DD and ID is lacking. So, in other words, types of post-school outcomes is individuals being able to go to college, get a job, or live independently. So what they're saying is there's a lack of evidence that suggests immersion in the standard academic curriculum for students with autism, other developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities, do well with post-school outcomes. Thus, they say the best approach is to provide a meaningful, individualized curriculum to each student with DD or ID, which matches their long-term goals. That is, individualized curriculum, meaning the student where they are currently, based on their current levels, the current context where they live and spend time, and addressing short-term goals, other intermediate goals that ultimately lead to long-term goals related to transitions. In other words, transition from elementary school to middle school, from middle school to high school, it's from high school to post-school. That's the type of approach they're advocating here for when they say individualized curriculum matches long-term goals. And they also argue that it's very difficult, I'll say that it's also very difficult but important that teachers and other IEP members make the right decisions about what will be taught, right? Because we talked earlier about how students of these populations may need help in far more areas, far more skills than anyone has time or resources to address. So it's really critical that the right decisions are made about what to teach. And there are benefits and risks associated with those decisions related to the balance between academic and functional life skills curriculum. And so this is a diagram from your assigned reading, which I think is wonderful and really clarifies some of does a nice job of summarizing the advantages and disadvantages of either exclusively teaching standard academic curriculum, exclusively teaching a functional life skills and vocational skills curriculum, or combining functional life skills curriculum and standard academic curriculum, or even teaching neither academic or functional life skills curriculum. So let's start from the left and we'll go to the right. So if you exclusively teach standard academic curriculum to your student, a potential benefit is improved access to general education settings and post-secondary education, potentially. However, a potential disadvantage is they may be actually unprepared to live and work independently as adults. So one can argue that, okay, so just because, first of all, just because they get more or improved access to general education, post-secondary education settings does not mean that they're necessarily going to benefit from instruction on the standard academic curriculum in those settings. Okay, and therefore that's ultimately what can lead to being unprepared to live and work independently as adults. Another way to look at it is that if everyone's on their IEP team is focused on their academic skills, then they're unable to, in some cases, many students will be unable to care for themselves, and therefore they might not even get access to certain settings where they can live and work independently as adults. Okay, so let's look at now combining functional life skills curriculum and standard academic curriculum. Now, there are problems with this. One problem is that there's probably insufficient time to master either academic or functional goals. Students whose curricula are designed this way may continue to lag behind peers academically, and they may not be adequately prepared for independent functioning as an adult. Now, exclusively teaching a functional life and vocational skills curriculum may lead to an improved likelihood of independent living and working in adult integrated settings. So that's a potential advantage. A potential disadvantage that they're less likely to access general education settings and post-school educational options. All right. Now, if they neither receive curriculum focus on academic or functional life skills, then you're essentially relegating that student to lifelong dependency on others and around-the-clock supervision. All right, ASR 4. Which special education law requires nearly all students to master the standard academic curriculum? Is it A, IDEA, or B, ESA? A couple more seconds. Okay, I'll go ahead and close the poll, and the answer is B, ESA. ASR 5. Those educators who lean towards curricula corresponding to IDEA requirements, A, note that the positive effects of immersion in the standard academic curriculum on post-school outcomes for students with DD and ID is lacking. B, say that students do not need functional skills as a prerequisite to academic skills. Or C, students have a right to a full educational opportunity and that we do not know yet their potential to learn it. Give me a few more seconds. All right, I'll close the poll, and the answer here is A. And the other two, B and C, are things that educators who lean towards curricula corresponding to ESA would argue. ASR 6. Less access to general education settings and post-school options is a disadvantage of curricula that A, exclusively teach the standard curriculum, B, mix the standard and functional life skills curricula, or C, teach only functional and vocational skills. A couple more seconds. All right, I'll go ahead and close the poll. The answer here is C, teach only functional and vocational skills. ASR 7, teaching neither the standard academic curriculum or individualized functional and vocational curricula is associated with A, students not needing functional skills as a prerequisite to academic skills, B, unprepared to live and work independently, C, a dependency on and supervision from others required forever, or D, reduced communication. A couple more seconds. All right, I'll close the poll, and the answer here is C, teaching neither the standard academic curriculum or individualized functional or vocational curricula is associated with dependency on and supervision from others required forever. ASR 8. Improved access to general education settings and post-secondary education is a potential benefit of A, exclusively teaching the standard academic curriculum, B, combining functional and vocational skills curricula with a standard academic curriculum, C, exclusively teaching functional and vocational skills curriculum. A few more seconds. All right, I'll close the poll, and the answer here is A, exclusively teaching the standard academic curriculum. So note that a big disadvantage there, though, is that they're less likely to live and work independently as an adult. And improved access to general education settings and post-secondary education does not mean necessarily that the student is going to be successful in those environments. All right, so that wraps up this video part. In the next video part, we'll move on to curricular areas and some consideration.